Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Gameweek 13 cheat sheet. I just want to mention that maybe, of course, this video will have a couple of coughs. Unfortunately, I've fallen ill again, so we'll see how we get through the video. But if you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list of FPL assets based on position, based on the kind of underlying stats of these players, my expected minutes, my understanding of their tactics, and of course an evaluation of their fixture run ahead. Not just the 3 games that you see here, but going forwards, 6 to 8 game weeks at a time. Also keep in mind that there's less value towards free hits in the future when we arrive at game week 16, where you have 5 free transfers. And also just noting that that's not the same week where people leave to AFCON. That might be a week where people do leave for AFCON, but it's very possible that a lot of African players who actually have qualified towards AFCON will still play in game week 16. All right, let's just jump into game week 13. If you're watching this and you're actually creating a free hit and you actually wanted to look at the free hit cheat sheet, there will be a free hit cheat sheet. But, without further ado, let's start with the video. Quick aside from the FPL chat, I wanted to mention I'm actually playing a new app called Fantasy Gaming Hub. As you can see here, it's even something that I'm playing right here. So this just matches my screen. It's a card-based collection game, also focused around the Premier League, but it's fantasy as well. Different from FPL, it's not around budgets. It's not around sort of, curating squads. It's actually just about building up a collection of players that you can sort of start to field out on specific game weeks. So for example, for this game week, it's very simple to sort of create a squad. I've got a Saturday team. I also have a Sunday team, which I've already set up in place. As I said, my prize player right now is Iliman Ndiaye. Whereas Liverpool, I'm not so fond of. I can even train someone like Ndiaye in the future as well. And that's probably what I'm actually looking to do. Maybe around goals and assists more so than anything else. But the key thing is I can continue to build my sort of squad of players, my collection of players, and then actually I can go head to head versus other managers in the world and hopefully promote within certain divisions. So right now, I just got promoted from Kickabout to Park Players. I'm working all the way up to Legendary in due course. But you get free prizes, you get free rewards as well for competing in these competitions, and you can even get promoted, as I said, within these leagues. The key point is to sort of build up your card collection. If you want to actually get your daily free pack now, have a look at my personalized link in the description below, and you'll get redirected to your iOS store or an Android store to start playing right now. So in the midfield position, we have not too many changes. I think we kind of hit the nail on the head on most of the picks last week. However, there are some pretty monumental changes, I think, within the cheaper spots. And then, of course, we need to kind of discuss, I guess, as a whole and how that sort of changes our valuation on players as a key topic. But I think from the cheap prices, Tavernier has gotten a rise within the cheat sheet. He's been on the cheat sheet previous times. I think, look, injuries always help someone like Marcus Tavernier get minutes, right? The key thing when you kind of see with Kluivert with having an abductor injury, Brooks not playing so well, is that usually just signals very good Tavernier minutes. And I think something that was completely shocking was him taking a penalty over Evan Nilsson, even though Semenyo was out. Now, the biggest thing going forwards, I suppose, will be a question as to, if let's say Kluivert continues to be out with an injury, who out of Tavernier and Semenyo takes penalties? I think my educated guess would probably be Semenyo still taking, because this is a player who still is, 2 for 1 for his record, compared to, let's say, someone like Evan Nilsson, who lost penalties simply being 0 and 1. So I think, obviously Tavernier has some equity in the bank now, having scored his penalty, but do I think Semenyo's off penalties? Probably not. So I'd edge it towards that, but you now have uncertainty, and that sort of devalues Semenyo as a pick. Paqueta also gets a rise. I think maybe it was a bit harsh, having him where he's at. This is still a player who, at the end of the day, has got tools, right, to get FPL points and is a reasonably solid pick for this sort of price point. Decent XGI for someone who actually plays 95 minutes, alongside decent DEFCON per 90 numbers. Nothing exceptional. The West Ham fixture run is still pretty poor, but I think we can also probably say that maybe we feel a little bit better about West Ham as a team so far. And this, I think, is the big plus, right? Where if Paqueta plays with the team that's slightly better, slightly higher performing, I think he's probably a better pick, because you'd also think, okay, higher chance of penalties, etc. So that's why he gets a soft rise. Caicedo gets a drop. I just think this is Chelsea's poor fixture run. So you're going to see a lot of negative changes towards Chelsea. Even though I think the key thing for a team like Chelsea is that you can be extremely confident that Chelsea is a very good team. I mean, they've proven, I think, under Maresca that for the most part, they've been a very, very solid team. It's just that I still think when you look at the fixture run ahead, you don't really want to own too many Chelsea players, and certainly not a Chelsea player who isn't producing crazy numbers, right? I think the biggest thing for Caicedo with his hot start was he able, or is he able to maintain, let's say, better underlines than previous career years for himself? And in reality, he's just not been able to do that. So without sort of a uptick in underlying numbers, I don't think we can have crazy expectations for Caicedo. The DEFCON numbers are nice, but you have players in the game like Anderson who do that and a bit more, to be quite honest, when you just look at underlying. So is there a reason to own Caicedo over a poorer fixture run? Probably not. Going forwards, we also have an Enzo drop. Now, Enzo's actually been extremely productive, so the underlying stats look really positive on him. And I do feel a bit hesitant maybe giving him this sort of nerf, but I do think with Palmer on the edge of coming back, that has a negative impact on an Enzo, and I think the kind of positions that he'll take up within the medium term. And then, of course, in the short term, you've got an Arsenal fixture. So for me, this is still an Enzo drop. I still think he's a wonderful pick. And if you want to hold on to Enzo, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're, let's say, get a free hit as well. But it's just more about taking into consideration all the context there. I think that makes a difference. Now, Rodgers has been added to the cheat sheet. However, I think the problem with Rodgers is that I'm still not that confident that he's that productive of a player. Once again, if you look at the NPXGI, it's very, very mediocre. I mean, this is a player who has the same numbers as Paqueta, and you probably wouldn't be that enthused about, Paqueta through open play, especially since Rodgers isn't someone who produces DEFCON and also isn't someone who, let's say, takes penalties, not that we're aware of at this moment in time. So I think whilst Rodgers is an extremely appealing pick for a free hit, he is not appealing to me from the perspective of being a long-term transfer. I think, of course, having a brace helps, and that obviously will change a lot of people's minds, but I still think the underlying numbers are very, very poor. In terms of Bruno Guimaraes, I mean, he's actually had some really productive weeks, and I'm glad that he's actually always been on the cheat sheet. It's not like I've added him as a result of his assists, but yeah, I mean, the weird thing for me is I'm still not so keen on Newcastle. Maybe if we come out of Everton away, which is actually, in my mind, a pretty poor fixture, maybe when we come out of that, I actually think that's when the Newcastle run starts in Game Week 14, and then we can sort of reassess. I think there'll be movements for Newcastle players. Trossard, I'm keeping him at where he's at. Not because Trossard has been, he's been very hot in form. Like, I think, some people will clearly ask the question of why do I have someone like Saka within my team? Or not within my team, but high up in the cheat sheet as a sort of tiered player compared to, let's say, players like Trossard and Eze who've produced more. I think the key thing for Trossard is probably still minutes, and then also just underlying numbers are not that impressive, even though he's actually performed quite far above that. The irony, of course, is I've owned Trossard for periods where he's done the opposite. But anyways, the key point with Trossard, I would say, is that I still think that with a deeper squad coming back into the team, even players like Madueke, who's going to lose more minutes, it's more likely that it's going to be someone like Trossard in my mind. So that's why I feel like Trossard is going to get a drop, more so than someone like Saka. So when you see, for example, substitutions within the North London derby, it's someone like Trossard who would come off, and Madueke who would even kind of slot himself towards the left, or even I think we might see going forwards a little bit more, which is something that we saw within the match as well. I think a little bit of Saka on the left and then maybe Madueke on the right, if that's going to be the pairing at any point in time. So that's why I think I can't give Trossard a rise, even though he's already done the business, if that makes sense. With Gakpo, he gets the soft little green because I do think that there's a huge plus here with regards to the minutes, simply the injuries, which we didn't anticipate before last week's deadline, towards aren't quite poor. You still have a lack of right-sided depth as well within the team, and that just allows for more players to play in different positions. So yeah, I think unfortunately this just means that Gakpo's minutes, or fortunately, right, you could be a Gakpo owner and you can enjoy this, is going to be good. I think it's more so from the perspective of, if let's say you sold Gakpo a few weeks ago, I think you can feel a bit hard done by, because it's not a poor decision when you're sort of ignoring a player because they haven't been getting the minutes. Like, for example, Gakpo has been benched recently, but simply injuries will change that landscape. As far as Cunha, there's a big asterisk on him now. I don't really know how I feel about Cunha. I have added him just for posterity's sake. I think United still have a really good fixture run to come, but there's no interest within Cunha for now. And then within the top tier picks, I think this is a great Foden week, but I still think, City kind of still have a bit of a yo-yoing effect on fixtures, and Foden's underlying still haven't ticked up to, a place where I feel comfortable saying that he's one of the better picks now within the game. Keep in mind, of course, he's a great finisher. It's just kind of looking at fixtures like Leeds. I mean, Leeds at home is great. Fulham away is really poor. And the Crystal Palace away, which is Game Week 16, is also poor. So I almost think that the Foden run and even the City run for, let's say, if you want to double up and triple up on City, kind of starts a little bit later. So maybe we're talking a game week 16 or 17 as a good opportunity, or 17 rather, is a good opportunity to actually invest into those City players that you might not have had the opportunity to invest into. So for me, this is a good buying week for City. But if you ignore, I almost think you wait a little bit longer. And I don't think there's too much to really explain within the sort of top tier positions. Yes, of course, we've had a pretty flat sort of Man United performance. Will I overreact to that? Not really. I think United are still a team that we trust as a high quality attack. So why be so worried about it? At the same time, I would say when you look at, let's say, maybe investing into United in the future, I think there can be questions about when the excuse me, right hand side players go towards AFCON, do you still have the faith in the team strength? And I think that's a very fair question to ask, because you can even look at the performance versus Everton, and that's with Cunha out of the team, Mount subbed, which is basically, I think, a little bit of a dressing rehearsal for when the team's a bit weaker, right? So when you play worse players, and that still had Mbeumo and Ahmed, but the quality was very much missing. And I think that's the question for me when that fixture run starts in or when that fixture run hits 17. Do you really want to own these United players, past these next 4 games? I think the key thing is that for the next few games, they're a very, very easy own. But it's just about after that, do you have any comfort owning them? And I think my answer is going to be no. In the forward positions, though, just something to mention, I think this is the position that has me the most bored. I think there are interesting players like Raul and Wilson who I will not have mentioned within the video because I still think that the fixture runs are quite mediocre. And ultimately, would I want to have a third additional forward on top of like 2 forwards that I already have? Or would I rather have a cheap midfielder? I think my answer to that question is I would take the cheap midfielder every time. But I can understand people wanting or being tempted with, let's say, Raul and Wilson. I'm not exactly sure what the Muniz current timeline is. But within Wilson's case, I think the main thing is Nuno seems to be maybe understanding slowly that Wilson needs to stay on the pitch, and we can kind of reevaluate post Liverpool. But yeah, I mean, I still think that this is a forward landscape where Thiago and Welbeck actually look much more appealing compared to Mateta because of minutes, and you can see that with obviously Mateta's minutes getting harmed by Nketiah coming back into the game. That's not enough for me to really push Mateta towards a yellow pick until I think he comes out of Man United at home plus Burnley away. But I think that, Thiago and Welbeck are much further ahead in my estimation. João Pedro and Bowen do get drops because of fixture runs and things like that. Joker is still an asterisk because he's not even starting within the game versus Bayern Munich. But it does probably suggest that maybe he could start in a game like Gameweek 13. Haaland is Haaland, and we'll just move on. As far as the defense, I would say that because Burnley have really, really separated themselves from Leeds and Sunderland. So I think when you look at this table, the key thing is to look at the right-hand side of the table. Look at the team XGC. Burnley are almost 10 XG away from their peers here in Sunderland and Leeds, who are very, very far apart from them. And I think what's impressive is that in previous seasons, a lot of the promoted teams, were nowhere near, let's say, mid-table in terms of defense. So it's quite impressive that 2 out of 3, have been successful within that. But Burnley, not at all. And I think, as I continue to say, they are absolutely the team you want to target from an offensive point of view. So Esteban Hartman do get drops because of that. Cash has been added because I think if you're actually looking for a shopping opportunity this week for a defender at this sort of price point, I think Cash is quite appealing from that perspective. I think Van den Berg is also very appealing too from Brentford. So that's something to mention. But I think these are more, you can also kind of look at these players as free hit only buys, because if I look at, for example, Cash, the next 2 games are poor. I think the same thing applies to, let's say, Brentford. I think the key thing is that both Aston Villa and Brentford do face Arsenal over the next 2 games. So is there an interesting opportunity to really have all these players? Probably not. As far as that next tier, I think the key addition here is just O'Reilly. I was waiting for City to play versus Newcastle this week, and I was also waiting for the Leverkusen game to happen, because I think the main thing when you look at someone like O'Reilly is that, it would have never made sense to actually buy O'Reilly for Newcastle. So, a lot of people are asking, where is O'Reilly? But really the answer is, here's O'Reilly. He's ready. He's fit. He's most likely going to start this Leeds game. I think it's pretty clear that some recent Ryan Aitnery performances has put him pretty low within the pecking order. And O'Reilly just has been brilliant. His underlying stats compared to someone like Mateus Nunes is far, far apart, which is why Nunes is not on the cheat sheet and O'Reilly is. I would just feel much more comfortable owning O'Reilly in FPL. So that's why he's top here. And City have been a pretty impressive defense so far this season. If you kind of, I guess, ignore Arsenal for the most part. As far as Chalobah, he gets a drop because this is related to Chelsea's fixture run, nothing else in particular. His DEFCON numbers, as we kind of expected, have also trailed off a little bit, as expected, because Chelsea were not a team last season whatsoever that were like producing a lot of DEFCON, and I didn't expect any of the defenders to consistently produce it as they actually did, for example, at the beginning games of the season. Instead, though, what Chelsea has become is, even more defensive. I think their numbers are looking better and better every match. And they've gotten some clean sheets recently. But of course, you need to contextualize that the fixture run is getting worse, which is why we get the drop here for Chalobah. Moving towards the next tier, I've given Guardiola rise. I'm not very confident in Guardiola as a pick, though. I think the key thing is that he's lost that sort of upper bound value in terms of, what we call ceiling in FPL, where I just don't see any of the sort of attacking base of returns. As I said, his latest return that I can really remember from the Premier League is actually just slipping in a pass towards Haaland, where Haaland basically scored a solo goal. Wasn't really anything particular that I think would make me say that it makes a lot of sense to own Guardiola within the game. He's not a DEFCON producer as well. And at that point, you should always be picking an Arsenal defender over someone like Guardiola, so as long as you can bank on the minutes of an Arsenal player. So moving on towards the sort of upper bound of the list, Saliba gets a rise, and this is, of course, with the confirmation that someone like Saliba is, fit and ready to play. Gabriel's out for a long time, much longer than we anticipated. Saliba obviously gets a rise. Cucurella gets a drop within the cheat sheet too, and I think that's the key thing to sort of mention. This is also Chelsea fixture run related. Chelsea's defensive numbers are decent, but they're not still, anywhere near, for example, what you really want compared to, let's say, some of the Arsenal picks here. And even towards, let's say, Virgil, who's here and a lot of people can have questions over. I think it's fair to question Virgil and where he's at in the cheat sheet. I still would give a team like Liverpool the next few fixtures that they have, and then we can reconsider. I think Gameweek 16 is probably a good opportunity to sell Virgil if they've not made any sort of improvements whatsoever as a team. But that's basically the defensive part of the cheat sheet. At the goalkeeping position, I probably should have actually made Verbruggen actually rise twice back to back, but I did recommend him, as a free hit goalkeeper. He did, of course, make a pen save and not actually keep a clean sheet versus Brentford, but I do think Brighton's defensive numbers are pretty decent. Situating themselves at 8th, it makes a lot of sense to sort of see why Verbruggen is a good investment for a 4.4 goalkeeper. It's interesting that actually all of the 4.5 goalkeepers that we have on this list are all ones that we quite like, right? Petrovic, Rose, and Verbruggen, all very close as well in terms of XGC, and I think a lot of that is just going to be colored by the individual games that they've played, the slight differences in fixture difficulty. I don't think there's a massive difference in terms of the quality of the goalkeepers, but of course, one positive, I suppose, is when you look at this kind of saves per 90 metric, is that Rose does produce a little bit more saves than some of the other teams. And I think that can also give you a net benefit in terms of points if you have faith in things like that. As far as, let's say, the next sort of tier, I've given Sanchez a soft drop. It does feel harsh, but I think, fixture runs are quite key. Sanchez is not like a high shot stopping goalkeeper. He also is not sort of on Raya level numbers. And that's pretty much why he gets a drop. Now let's quickly move on to the free hit version of the cheat sheet. This is effectively just going to be a tier list of players that I think are, my favorite based on the free hit. I'm not really paying reference to price at all. This is almost just, if I wanted names on the sheet, these are the names on the sheet that I'd like in preferential order. So take this almost as sort of my, I guess, vision of an expected points production here for the cheat sheet. So within the midfield position, I've got Salah, Shade, Gakpo, Foden, Rodgers, Sarr, Szoboszlai, Dango. I don't think there's too much to be said here. I do think Dango's minutes are pretty mediocre at times, so I think he can be someone that can arguably be yellow, and maybe actually Damsgaard is a little bit more interesting than Dango. But I think if you can get the upper bound of minutes with Dango, it's always going to be a bit more interesting, right? He's one of the few players on this list here with extremely high XG per 90, and that's impressive. With Shade, I think the key difference here is that I would much rather have someone like Shade just because he plays that additional, 20 to 30 minutes of football, and that makes a significant difference. As far as, let's say, some of the players in the yellow tier, like Semenyo and Bruno, I think these are players where you can go for them if you're kind of lacking inspiration in terms of, like, if you don't want to back for whatever reason some of the players in this cheat sheet that are green, and you maybe want to go for more of a 4-4-2 structure, for example, to kind of set up the free hit you want. I think these are options that you can consider. I probably wouldn't touch Saka and Mbumo just based on the fixtures. And within the forward cheat sheet, I think it's just Haaland and Thiago for me. Mateta's minutes, I feel like, are going to be dubious regardless of the European match, which unfortunately always, with those games being played on Thursday, I think always have an impact in terms of fitness for the next match. And then with Watkins, his recent minutes and his underlying stats are just really, really poor. I just wouldn't trust it. I could even imagine a world where Watkins can once again get benched. I think it's plausible, and I really wouldn't touch him for the free hit, despite how good the fixture looks. In the next list, in terms of defenders, I think O'Reilly, Nunez, Collins, Vandenberg, Cash are my favorite options. This is because there's a huge clean sheet gulf against players like, let's say, a Virgil or a Senesi, who are good at DEFCON, but, have quite a big gap in terms of clean sheet odds. I think the same applies to Arsenal defenders. Sure, some Arsenal defenders can be on this list. I think they can be, close to, let's say, some of the yellow players here. But do you really need to shop for an Arsenal defender? Is that a good use of budget in the free hit? I don't think so. It's quite a defensive way of attacking this game week. I also think if you were going to do that, why free hit at all? Munoz is high up there, and I think this is a great United game, but at the same time, it's probably a case of, do you, I guess, have faith within the United offense, or has suddenly that Everton match and that sort of one game sample changed your mind in terms of how you feel about, this team? So I think that's quite a big difference, and something to think about as well. Excuse me. At the same time, to sort of suggest some differential options, I guess you want some auto subs here. And I think someone like Senesi's decent, someone like Richards is decent, maybe even, let's say, if not on the list, I think maybe even a Sunderland defender can be quite decent as well as a second auto sub. For goalkeepers, I think I'd stick to just Martinez, Calleja, and Donnarumma. This is purely based on clean sheet odds, but at the same time, you do have Raya, I guess, if you want to somehow defensively play against that Arsenal clean sheet percentage. I'm not someone who's super fond about that. I think I'd still maximize the upside here and take that chance. But that's going to be the free hit as well for Gameweek 13. So thank you so much for watching the cheat sheet, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.